And we have some newbies, well, actually just Coral, but that's okay. We're glad to have you. And we're going, the two main topics we're probably going to run into today, and they're very divergent, is one is the value of control and doing whatever you're doing in terms of self-defense. And the other one is second one, which is how do you deal with students who challenge your thinking? And that really ties in with item number 6, which is student input. And they're very, depending upon your level of self-confidence, that can be a very scary experience. Anyhow, so value of control is, just to define it, you're in the process of throwing a person or taking them down and whatnot. How much strength or power do you use, or does it depend on the situation, or in the dojo versus on the street? And I assume everyone has a copy of this really exciting outline. So anyone want to start off this topic?
I'll start off.
Okay.
Going for the first one, this is something I learned from one of the senior students in the dojo up in Baltimore, and he was a police officer in Baltimore. Actually, you met him, John. Shoot, my name, because his name will come back. Don't somebody taps out, don't let go. Ease up a little bit, but don't let go, because he said that the people in Baltimore were learning to do that. And there were a number of incidents where the cops let go. And the incident continued on until they were able to reestablish control. So for the first one, I'm sorry, not the first, submissions, tapping out versus street reality, ease up, but still maintain control. You assume that somebody's tapping out because, okay, don't go any further, but don't let go either.
Okay. I would say critical to the, and I've been in similar situations. There's a difference between class and street, and Thomas, you're very correct in pointing out that sometimes, because we're trained in the dojo to, when they tap out and let go, it's set back, they tap out and let go, and then person gets up and you have to, it's physical altercation all over again, which you don't want to have. And so I think lightening up on the submission a bit may be worth a while. If based upon students of mine that have been in street situations, one of the hardest things to realize is that what you're doing in class, if you were to follow through, it would ultimately injure your attacker, which would prevent them from continuing their attack. And that's a hard judgment call. And sometimes at the training, depending on the training, at least most of my students who've been in street situations were really surprised that they injured the person. But they just executed the technique. Very few of them have had to go into submit. I think only one has actually gone into a submission situation. In every other case, the person was injured by the technique itself, or when they impacted the ground. But this goes back to what you also said, Thomas, which is control. Law enforcement personnel are subject to a number of constraints that civilians are restricted to, and they have to stay in where they're supposed to. stay in compliance with those standards. And so they may let up a little bit. And I don't know whether in a street situation, and maybe someone can provide some feedback here, if you're in a street situation and you brought this person down, they're in a control hold of sorts, or they're standing and they're in a control hold. I've had that many times. Whether you can get them to calm down to the point where you can release them. Or what do you do if you believe they're a continuing threat to your safety? Does anyone want to make comment? Or
I think we're kind of talking about different types of control or different uses of the word. And I think they kind of are like a domino. Like if you think about it, instead of talking about jujitsu, think about like a police officer with his weapon. The first stage, like you're saying, can you talk the person out of this? Can you do that stuff? The first control is controlling your weapon. Like the officer's trying not to take his weapon out. That's your first control, is you're trying to control that. Once that isn't possible and you take your weapon out, how important is aiming your weapon? Very important. That's controlling your weapon once you've drawn it, right? You need to maintain control in that sense over your weapon, and you need to keep control over how you use it. That's self-control, but you need to use it to control the situation. And I think where it is this delicate balance between controlling yourself and controlling the situation. You can't lose either one.
right.
If you lose control of what you're doing, like letting go of something or not doing it properly or not doing it fully, that's going to not go well. And then once you've done something, you have to maintain control. And again, over yourself by not going further than you needed to, but also by not letting go. And you need to maintain that control. So I think in like every sense of the word, the entire point of everything is control. Self-control, situational control, control of your opponent, all of that.
2 points. One, you're referring to what's known as, in law enforcement, they refer to as a use of force continuum. And most agencies have a procedure where you can go from verbal, and there are various stages you can go before you get to the use of deadly force. And an officer can, if necessary, jump from one to clear to the other, but they have to be able to justify it. And there's some agencies that still don't have use of force continuums, but the other issue, which is control, I mean, when you teach a student how to set a submission and they've gotten their partner to tap out or what have you, how many of you have also taught, okay, this is how you get out of this hold safely while maintaining control, which Dane has said is necessary, maintaining control until you are in a safe position. And that's I mean, I still have students who will help each other up off the mat, which I try to keep them from doing. I mean, they're doing it out of kindness to each other, respect and courtesy and all these other positive values, but it can also become a habit. So on the street, after you've taken this person down, so to speak, you then reach out and help them back up. And if they have half a brain, you're in deep trouble.
You don't want to train to be a training partner.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I've seen a couple street situations in videos where the person they take a knife away from the person, and then when they hand the knife back.
Right.
And it's hard to train students to just, if you have a weapon, you remove it as far away as you safely can. Or in a class, you put that knife down on the ground behind you or out of your attacker's reach, and then you back away and let your partner go pick it up again. And you know, though we're talking, as you said, we're talking control of the situation here, Dane, as you said, and that has to be part of your training.
I think we could talk sometime about separating out ceremony from technique, because you know, like you were just mentioning, the thing about helping each other up and handing the weapon back, and even in some systems like kneeling before you start a situation, and all of those things, there's things that get mixed into it that you start thinking of as techniques. Like you want to bow to the person you're about to have a fight with or something, you know. And sometimes that ceremony clouds your thinking. You know, the way you preface these engagements can change everything.
Right. You know, I mean, I jokingly refer to, you know, on a street situation, you do not bow to the person before you're going to defend yourself, because you're going to get hit in the face by their knee or their foot. Or
Well, I see this all the time. I've seen these like you know, street fight situations on the
Yeah.
internet, and people will take stances and they'll initiate it like they're in a dojo. And
right,
karate is the worst of all. They train for sparring. They don't train for real life. So everything, like once you get that clean point, you like back off and wait for them to come again. You know, like there is no,
right.
all of those things. That's the ceremony of practicing in the dojo. And you need to separate out that from how you would handle, you know, real life. You can't do that.
I know when I first started in jiu-jitsu back in the 60s, your ready position was like this. And maybe 20 years ago or something, it switched to this. Because if you're like this, it means you're ready to fight and you want to fight.
Mhm.
And that can go against you in a court of law, even though you are the victim, or this person wants to beat up on you. You know, it's how the public perceive how you're perceived, not necessarily what the real situation is.
Yeah. As soon as you do that, you're in a match, not a
Yeah,
self-defense
right,
situation. You're
right.
you're matching off.
Okay,
Right, with no referee.
Right.
right. Um, do you ever, I'm going to ask this question, when you've worked with your students, do you ever discuss, okay, if you do this technique, this is what's going, you know, if you follow through on this technique, this is what is going to happen?
Yeah.
Or do you just, we're going to practice a wrist press and it's going to hurt a lot, and then they're going to tap out and you let go and the world continues to turn? I mean, do you take the time, do we take the time to say, if you do a wrist press properly and you drop down fast, it's going to break their wrist?
Yeah.
No ifs, ands, or buts. I mean, and this is a hard concept for some students to accept, that they will actually injure their attacker.
I always start by showing somebody things as the stretch, like doing it to yourself, you
Yeah,
know, as wrist stretches. So you can start feeling that limitation, and, you
yeah,
know, how it gets exponentially stiffer as you're pushing, and, you know, so you can kind of self feel it. And I think at the beginning, you need to mention it as a precaution. Like doing this will hurt. So don't do it. Don't be jerky, be subtle, because there's a potential for unintentional injury here in training. And then I think as they develop with it, you can explain it more as a feature of the technique, that if you jerk this quickly, it'll break their arm, you know, and then that becomes a thing you could explore. Again, once you've learned the control, that the technique is dangerous, you have to control it, then you can start exploring that danger, so to speak.
right. I think one of the things, and I put this in the May 1st issue of Budoshin Online from, I forget the sensei's name. he always sends me stuff from Russia. He translates it into English, and most of it's Russian, and I can't.
Oh, I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, and he had something he got from a jujitsu school in Russia. It's the 10 rules for jujitsu, which aren't really rules, but one of the important things he says is in jujitsu, you have to learn to accept pain. Pain is a part of learning, and if you want to, there's a new student handbook for BJJY members, and it has those 10 rules in there, and it's free to anyone who is a BJJY member, but it puts those 10 rules out there, and I've always followed them, but I've never, how do you say, I've never been able to, I never thought of them as a set of things that will happen in the dojo, and just for new students to be aware of it. But we do what you said, Dane, about bending the wrist so you can get some idea of what the pain, and part of practicing in the dojo is the realization when techniques are done on you that they will hurt. And at some point you will tap out because they hurt. And Seki had a contradictory, how do you say it, statement of, he says, if you feel the hold is set properly, tap out. If you feel pain, you're being injured. And then he'd also have once or twice a year a tournament where anything goes except no contact to the face. And he'd get upset with me because I tap out before I was in pain. And I'd say, Sensei, this is what you taught me. He says, because if you have pain, it's you're having injury. He never cleared that up for me, but it's do our students connect that level of pain with actual injury, with the potential of actual injury?
It's very hard to separate out in the beginning.
It's a, and how many of you have had injuries in your class? I mean, where someone has had to, okay, the paramedics have to come and take this person away.
I haven't had any of those, fortunately.
Pardon?
I haven't had any of those, fortunately.
Yeah, I've had like one, maybe two of those.
I've seen it once, but I think it was with a bow. It was a bow class.
Yeah, I mean, my first night of teaching jiu-jitsu back in the 60s, where I teaching the wide program, I had a brand new student. He came in. He was doing a hip throw, young man in his early 20s. He was coming in for a hip throw. He twisted his leg, and I heard this broomstick break. He broke his leg before he made contact with anyone. And what can you do?
Wow.
So I don't know if this is insightful, but I just want to note when I was practicing in the Arlington dojo, when Thomas was the sensei, we had statistically a less amount of injuries than the Pilates class before us. And just to tie that back into control, part of that is just because we're more aware that what we do is going to injure people, what we do is going to hurt. So just being mindful of that is, at least when you're training with others. If you're on, the street, obviously it's going to be different. Obviously, if they're going to punch you, you probably don't want to stay there and stand and just be like, yeah, punch me, I'll block and stuff like that. But I think that's a really cool statistic, and I like to just point that out.
Anybody want to respond to that?
I think it's a very interesting statistic that it's something you should boast. The safety of the dangerous art, right? The people doing it are careful and trained, and then something unexpected. I've heard that before too, about like children's things, like there's less injuries for children in martial arts programs than there are in any other sport that they partake in. You know, I think there's more like swimming injuries than there are martial arts injuries for children. But yeah, it all comes down to control. And
Yeah, yeah. I know when I teach, I like to have my students, the newer students will, you know, their stances will be such that if they do a straight fist to the person's face, they're maybe a foot or 2 feet away when that arm is extended. And I say, you know, we got to have some realism here. You don't even have to block that. And I'll physically move them up to where their fist ends up maybe 2 or 3 inches from the other person's face. And I'll say to that person who's supposed to be blocked, now you need to block. Because now there's a real potential. It's close enough where if your perception is such that you, oh yeah, this person can hit me, I need to block.
yeah, it's difficult to block something that isn't going to hit you.
Right.
It actually is. Yeah.
Right. I know when I taught jiu-jitsu junior high, school policy was based, because we had a lot of problems at school, was that if a student touched a teacher in an offensive manner, the teacher was required to file an assault report with the police. This is junior high. And junior high kids are incredibly physical. And I would have situations in the jiu-jitsu class, maybe twice a year, I wouldn't block well, and I'd get a bloody lip out of it. And that student would they would just be totally scared, I won't use the word, because they thought they were going to be arrested. And once I said, no, this is my fault. I didn't block properly. You're not going to get in trouble. You know, you're okay. They kind of took the pressure off the entire class. But I get hit in the mouth once or twice a year. It does happen. And one of the things I learned from it was, and as stupid as this may sound, if you're training for self-defense, maybe it's worthwhile getting hit in the mouth once, just so you know what it feels like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you know what it feels like, then it's no longer as great of a threat. I don't know, is that making any sense?
Yeah. It stops everything the first time it's ever happened.
Yes, it does. So I don't know, you know, I don't want to say, okay, one of my policies in the sensei is to make sure all of you students get hit in the mouth at least once, so that you know what it feels like. I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to sell that class, actually.
Yeah.
But
that's also higher on the stupid list, but
A lot of openings.
yeah. And Briston is now joining us from. Are you there, Briston?
Yeah, getting punched in
He'll
the
come
face
on eventually.
really humbles you.
Mm-hmm.
There he is. Good morning, Briston. Okay.
no audio yet.
Okay. How do you deal with, because there's another item in here. An injured attacker may be able to continue his attack. Either because of whatever drugs they're on, or because their adrenaline level is so high that they're not immediately feeling the pain. And one of the things you learn as a student of jiu-jitsu, and all of your problems, I'm sure in this situation, because you've experienced techniques and pain being applied to you nerve attacks, things of this sort, you probably have the ability to turn it off to an extent. You can control, you can say, okay, this hurts, hunky-dory, I'm going to go on. We all do this in our daily lives anyway, various things that happen to us. So the question, you know, and the question is, what do you do for a person who, okay, let's say maybe you break his wrist with a wrist press submission, or a hand throw breaks his wrist, or you break a finger, one of his fingers. What do you do if he continues his attack?
I think with that first point about control, you shouldn't have let go when you broke his wrist. So whether it broke or not, you should still be doing things, right? Like you shouldn't have let go and let him reconstitute himself there. You know, I think you need to just, we've talked about it before, that flow from one thing to another. There's also something we never talk about. Whenever we talk about things as martial artists, there's always a way to win. I think something you need to remember too is sometimes you're going to lose the situation, and that's what makes it so. You know, it might be difficult. Like if you're fighting Mike Tyson on PCP, I don't know that you're going to get him with any kind of a wrist lock or arm bar or anything ever. You know what I mean? There might just be some unwinnable situations that you end up in, and that's something you have to keep in mind too. And I think you have to look at every situation like it is that. So even if you break the person's wrist, you should expect that they're not done. You should always expect they're not done until it's just completely clear, you know, and just breaking the wrist won't stop them. So you have to do something that will stop them.
Yeah, I want to build off of that. We talk about self-control, but self-control requires self-awareness. So someone like me and who looks like me can get away with a lot more than someone who's like twice my size and probably, you know, male, if I want to say. But if I break somebody's wrist in a fight, like on a street, and they're still coming after me, I'm going for their knees, right? And then I'm running. That's because I probably can't outrun that. And the chances of me fighting them and then winning after that, if I let go and then lose the only grip that I have, is like much less likely.
Okay. Yeah, I think someone once told me decades ago, if a person's high on, this is back in the LSD day, if a person's high on LSD or whatever other drug, it doesn't matter what martial art you know, it's basically worthless because they don't feel pain. You have nothing to gain. That was not meant to be your rhyme, but and the best thing you can do is grab a 2x4 or baseball bat or anything that you can use to break one of their legs. They won't feel the pain, but they can't come after you. I mean, and that's a hard thing to say to a person because it means you're aware that you are going to seriously hurt this person. But what's the alternative?
I actually saw police officer footage where somebody on drugs was attacking the officer. They were unarmed, but they were so much larger than the officer that she fired on him and it did nothing. He
Right.
just kept coming at her. And, you know, she was like emptying into him and he
Right.
had no response to it.
Yeah, I have seen, there's a police video I've seen courtesy of LAPD years ago. The person was on drugs. He was shot at least 6 times in his torso. And he basically kept coming at him until he bled out. And there's nothing, I mean, this is a scary situation. Because we're saying, here you have all this martial arts training. And this person probably doesn't know what they're doing anyway. and anything you've been taught to quote unquote reasonably do isn't going to work. So what do you do now? And that's, you know, I don't know how we discuss that with our students.
I think the getting hit in the mouth thing is super important in a lot of different ways. Like, people need to understand that mastery of the martial arts means you only get hit in the face occasionally.
Right.
It doesn't mean never.
Good one.
You know?
Right. Thank you for saying good analogy.
Also, a big part of my martial arts training is how to avoid that situation in the first place. Like, I'm not going to be out at 10 p.m. and I'm not going to be down a really sketchy alleyway. So a lot of it is just situational awareness, even before a fight even potentially starts. You're not looking for trouble. I mean, we're not looking for like Batman. We're not Batman or anything like that as much as we want to be.
Yeah.
Like Mr. Miyagi said, the best defense is don't be there.
Yeah. I had a black belt years ago. Thomas, you may remember Mark Jordan.
Oh yeah.
And
Yeah.
his famous phrase was, he was originally from the South. His famous phrase was, "No be there." And simply, you know, to be out of range of the attacker, don't put yourself in the situation. As Coral said, situational awareness, be aware of your surroundings. And I use that comment a lot because it sticks with people. Not only because it's poor grammar, but because it makes sense. But maybe in parts of the US it's good grammar. I don't know. So okay, so there's situational awareness. There's I've had to deal with a couple of people who've been on drugs. It is not a I had to walk one kid he was taller than I was, who was on drugs. He had tried to he had attacked another student, and I had to schlep this kid after school about 200 yards in a proper arm lock plus nerve attack to the side of the neck to keep some control over him. And what I had to do was, rather than applying both at once was useless, so I had to go back and forth between applying pressure to one to the other all through this track. And there were some other issues that were going on as well. But you learn, I say, you learn from experience. A lot of it is you know, I hate to say you learn from experience that you don't wish on any of your students. Our goal as instructors is that our students never get into fights or situations where they have to defend themselves. That's the goal. And we don't, or we can't put our students in 100% realistic situations.
I think that's an important thing too, that there's the two, like the yin and the yang of the martial arts, like the modern day way we train martial arts. I think it's kind of baked into it that you're not going to use it. Like, we don't live in a world where you need samurai defensive techniques, but we live in a world where we don't want those to go away, and that we want to kind of approximate the kind of moral and philosophical changes that happen to a person who did do that kind of combat. Like, the samurai were transformed compared to the average person who didn't see that kind of world. So rather than go around on a campaign of bloodshed, you go to the dojo and you approximate those kinds of things. And over time, you get those same lessons. You learn about humility, and you learn about self-control and discipline, and you get all of the benefits. So in combat, maybe you go for 8 months, but you're at 100%, and then you get transformed. In the dojo, you go at 10% and you do it for 30 years, and then you're transformed. So, there's that aspect of the training, and then there's the real world utility of it. And I think that's kind of secondary today, because we live in a world where we're assuming you're not supposed to use it. You shouldn't be training because you're going to use it. The fact that if you needed to use it, it's there. But I think we all expect and hope we don't need it. If it's training that you really, really need, you train differently. Like a police officer needs to train in the things that a police officer will see. They don't need to train in everything imaginable and then different lineages of it and how, you know what I'm saying? Getting into the minutia of it and the art of it isn't necessary if you just need to be able to handcuff somebody. And that's its own art. That's kind of a thing in jujitsu too. The way we study it, it's a hodgepodge of every jujitsu that's ever happened, but they used to be very, very specific. Like there's an entire form of jujitsu that's just rope tying. And that's how the police would wrap you up. And then that's become its own art because nobody uses rope to tie you up anymore. But now that's incorporated in, we'll do belt things sometimes. And, there were arts of restraining people that police would use. Now that's mixed in with the stuff where you're pulling somebody off a horse. So now we learn throws that are for pulling people off horses, and we learn throws that are for police engagements. And it's all mixed together, So that's just to take it deeper off into the dirt.
Well, it's kind of like, I think one of the niceties of jujitsu, if you can put it that way, is that the art has been able to adjust to changes in how do you call it? Changes in realistic confrontational situations. How they've changed. Not to be facetious, instead of pulling a person off a horse today, you might pull them off a motorcycle. Right. I mean, that's I wouldn't try that, but there are a lot of similarities. One of the things I found with and the way I teach has been affected by how I've worked with law enforcement, because for example, LAPD went after the Rodney King incident. We were informed that they had been doing research, and they knew that 80%, they were able to determine what 80% of the physical confrontations that police ran into, the actual physical action by the perpetrator. And one of the great misassumptions was that they were attacking the police, and the reality is they were trying to get away from the police. And so they switched their training to deal with 80% of these physical contact situations, which not only it reduced the level of violence, injuries, police complaints, etc. on both sides. There were less perpetrators were injured and arrested. Less police officers were injured and were put into those situations as well. But it's hard to train civilians for that type of environment. And the other extreme is you don't want the civilian becoming paranoid. And once years ago, I had a student ask me, what does paranoid mean? That's when you put two noids together. But anyway, sick humor. But you can end up with students who come to your program because they're paranoid, or you as a sensei can make them paranoid. But then a lot of that depends on their personality. So maybe a segue here is, how do you as a sensei help them develop a sense of confidence where they will know how far they need to go with an attacker, or because it's all a judgment call. My first year teaching in this junior high school, I took over a 9th grade homeroom, and I probably told this story, but I had a boy that's when they had separate boys and girls homerooms for 20 minutes a day, which I always thought was a total waste of time. And he really did not like me. One day, as we're walking back to class, he came up behind me, put a pin around my neck, grabbed my arm behind, and held my other arm behind me. And we were on concrete, at which point I threw him with a hip throw. And as he was going over, I realized who he was. So I was able to put him down fairly gently. He got some scrapes out of it, but had I gone full bore, he would not have gotten up. Okay. His main concern that he was going, well, I said before, was that he was going to be arrested. And I told him, I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm okay." Gosh, shit. I said, "Go to class." And there's another story that went on after that, but it turned out that solved his problem. Never had a problem with him again. But the point is, I recognized that during that technique, who the person was. And so I can change my reaction or response to prevent him from hopefully getting injured. But how do you train a student to do that? Because if we're talking about value of control, how do you train? I mean, how do you train a student to make that split decision to sit? How do you train a student to make that split-second decision as to whether to do that wrist press really fast or just go slowly and see what happens? Because they're basically in automatic mode. Mushin. Is there any way you can train students for that, or?
Yes. So all the senseis I've ever had it's been a lot of their example more than what they have said. So a good example is like Sensei Thomas used to put me in like little holds, but it hurt, but it would never break, and it'd be very it'd be on the brink of what you would think would break, but it's actually very controlled. And the same with, I had another sensei, Adam, and he was very similar in that way. But you can say it as many times as you want. In martial arts, it is a very contact sport. Your students are going to learn more from what you show and what your actions are, and obviously vice versa, what their actions are and what you tell them, than if you just tell it to them.
Okay. Coral, I think you bring up a very important point, is that when we're doing a submission on a person, you're feeling that you're saying, okay, he's got me in a shoulder lock pin. And because you've done that technique, you know what pain and potential injury, if you're experienced enough with it, what its potential is. And Thomas, while setting that pin on you, because it's been done to him, and Thomas is very relaxed when he's doing this because he's in control, okay, which is ideally what you should all be. It's Thomas can feel how your body is responding, and as a result, he probably has a very good idea of how much pain he is actually creating in you. And maybe that is what control is. If we know what we, in our minds, because it's been done to us, we know how much pain we're causing. We know, okay, no, this is going to hurt a hell of a lot, but it's not injuring the person yet. It hasn't dislocated their shoulder. And that's where the control is. You know, to know how far you can go without debilitating the person. And then you have to make the value judgment. Is it necessary to actually cause an injury? And I don't know how to solve those.
You know, I think in essence, it's like it's really no different than learning an instrument. And you can only, you know, I think we've talked about this before. There's teaching and there's learning. And you can only teach what you can teach and then hope it gets learned. You know, it's a double-sided sword there. And if the person's not learning what you're teaching, that comes down to the person, and they need to address that. You know, so I think as a teacher, you can demonstrate, you lead by example, you show all of this, but the person has to learn to do it, and they have to learn that feel. It becomes, you know, the onus is on them at a certain point. If you're doing your job, now it's all their job. And I think what you're really trying to develop in them is a touch. Like when you play an instrument, the instrument becomes a part of your body. You don't have to look at it. The same way you can scratch your nose, you can play a chord or you can play a scale. It's part of you. You know where it is. You know how hard you're pressing. You don't even think about it. You just do that. And then if you're very good at it, it sounds beautiful. And if you're a beginner, it sounds clunky. The same way a baby can't walk. You know, it's the same kind of thing. Once you get good at it, there's a feel. And I think what you're describing, ultimately what they're manifesting is that the opponent feels just like they do. You know, the way you know what's going on with your own wrist lock, if somebody else's hand was in my hand, I would go exactly as far as I just went, because I know exactly where that feels to them. Their hand feels like my hand, ultimately. You know exactly what you're doing to them by feel. You feel where they are the way as if you're doing it to yourself, so to speak.
Okay. I understand you completely.
I think it's that feel you're trying to get to the person.
Yeah. Lau and Briston, feel free to speak up. Okay. If you have something, rank has no bearing here.
Yes, Sir Kirby, in my experience, when I teach my students, I first slowly, then after that, I motivate them that the effectiveness of the technique should feel the pain. That is how we gauge the effectivity of the techniques. That's how I motivate my students.
I think what Dane and Lau and I mentioned is that feel is very important. And if I say part of our humanity is that we try to be very conscious of what is happening to people we associate with, and we rely a great deal on looking at a person's face to get facial signals for them to see what's going on. Okay.
Yeah.
And as martial artists, or if you're defending yourself, trying to maintain that facial contact during a technique is your greatest enemy, because I go to analogy with and this came up because years ago I had a dog that was very well trained, and if there's a school nearby, whenever there was a crosswalk, I'd stop, the dog would sit down, and I had trained it to look both ways, and then we get up and cross the street. And one day this crossing guard says, "My God," she says, "I wish we could get our kids to do that." That's why they have to have crossing guards. So, but the seriousness of it is when all of you were little kids, your parents told you to look where you are going. And in the martial arts, that is the number one, one of the number one rules. Look where you are going, because that directs your ki or energy. And if you're trying to do a hand throw and you're looking at their hand to see if you have the hold set right, there is no way that you can execute the technique, because your head won't turn. And if you turn your head and look, to your left, you can then pivot, you turn your body, and the rest of the body will follow. And this is I work with my students, and it's like almost the first day. It's it's what your parents said when you were a little 2-year-old. Look where you're going. And because you have to be able to tell if a hold is set correctly by feel, because that's what's going to save your butt on the street. You can look at it and say, oh yeah, I have this set right, and I'm not applying any pressure to it. But if you know how it feels when the pressure is set correctly, as Dane says, Lao says, you've got the hold. Your grip may not be perfect, okay, or in exactly the right place, but you'll know that the wrist is locked, and if you move your body, lo and behold, the wrist will probably break on the way down if you maintain that feel. And so that's why it's so important you bring it up, because feel is what allows you to control your attacker. Not looking at them with a smile or with a drool coming down, from the corner of your mouth, or a death stare, or any of these other things. Okay. So that feel, I'm glad this came up, because feel is your control. And and it's just, even Carl said, if you feel you're doing it right, and it, and as you get experienced, you know what the proper feel is, and by feel how much potential injury or pain or discomfort you're causing this person. And that's what gives you the control. So,
and I guess I guess my point is, you can't teach it. You have to provide opportunities to learn it.
to experience it, yes. Yes. And that's why one of those rules is, if you're in a jiu-jitsu class, for new students, if you're in a jiu-jitsu class, be prepared for pain. Because, and this is a lot worse than, blocking a hit or something like that. You're going to have pain. That's part of the learning process, to know what the technique does to the human body.
It's actually a great way to not get injured. I
Yeah,
think that's where injuries happen, is that resistance to the pain. You hurt yourself trying to jerk out of it instead of accepting it.
right. And one of the keys to reducing the level of pain, by the way, is if you have a student, if you work with someone, they tend to be a lot aggressive. If you can relax, it will take some of the pressure off the joint, because the muscles are relaxing, and you will feel less pain, at least for a little bit. Yeah, I'm stuck now. That's the, I guess that's what makes a technique successful or not, is a level of, is your awareness of how much pain and discomfort you're causing this other person. And there's just to make this comment, because it was made a few weeks ago, I think, black belt, which is reinventing itself. If any of you have followed it online, I think that there was a comment that the article was on nerve attacks, and saying how hits are effective, and someone countered and said, well, the person's moving. How do you make a nerve attack effective with a hit on a person who's moving? And so someone else responded, well, I mean, my response would be, you don't hit. I know very few nerve techniques in jiu-jitsu that are done with strikes or hits. Most of it's just you apply the hand and then you apply the pressure so that you have this body in contact. Because if you try to hit someone and they can move away from that hit, even if it's from the impact of that hit, that attack is not going to be as effective. It's when they have no place to go, like the wrist press. If they can't go any further down, the wrist breaks. And so it's the same concept. And you can tell by feel whether or not a nerve attack is working on a person. You don't have to look at them and smile. Anyway, do we have anything else we can do with this topic? We dealt with, I think we've done. Let's go to the next one, which is, how do you deal with students who challenge your thinking? Does anyone have anything else they want to mention in terms of value of control? I mean, we've hit feel, we've hit know, be there, avoid the situation, situational awareness. Situation, and control in the actual technique. So you may not really want to injure the person. You may just want to control them or put them in their place, so to speak. Anything else anyone want to cover with respect to value of control? Just one more thing, I'm going to say it. How do you justify the use of, I mean, there's some techniques that can, strikes that can do an incredible amount of damage or be fatal, and I'll include fatal. I don't consider breaking a person's nose a serious injury. I mean, yes, it's messy, yes, it hurts, yes, it's bloody, but it's not a serious injury. On the other hand, one of the techniques we teach in Budoshin for a choke or something, or a hit, is a strike, straight in strike to the larynx, which can collapse the larynx, which can be fatal if you don't know how to get and this is not medical advice, if you don't know how to get the larynx back open somewhat to help the person breathe. And the way you do that, surprisingly, is the same way if a person breaks their nose, the palm of your thumb, base of your thumbs, just squeeze that nose together, and that'll help put things back in line to a certain extent. The same thing, you can try it on with the larynx, and it may open up the airway or not, but this is not medical advice. Are there some techniques that are just, you really have to use a judgment call and executing them because your response may be way out of line with the attack?
That's that thing I was talking about before, where we do like a survey of jujitsu, where we learn everything ever instead of learning, gentleman's jujitsu, where you're wearing a suit and you're online at the theater and somebody grabs your lapel. That's a different set of techniques than you're on the battlefield and somebody just grabbed your helmet and they're choking you, or a bayonet fight or whatever. So even in like Aikido, some of the Jo techniques are actually bayonet techniques, and that has a limited utility in real life. And so sometimes you're studying things that are inappropriate for your needs. So, like you're saying, there is times where you might be using a completely inappropriate response just because they're is a use case for the spear hand to the throat. Not every use case needs a spear hand to the throat. So you start having to catalog these things into where they're useful, where and when. And that's where it starts getting, you need to have a set of things that are what your core useful techniques are that you train for self-defense. And then the other things are like a survey of historical jujitsu, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know, so like if all you train, this is a karate thing sometimes too. The responses you train are absolutely disproportionate. Somebody grabs your lapel,
Right.
and the first thing is like a karate chop to the throat. Then you do the spear to the throat. Then you do an eye gouge, box their ears, and then maybe you grab their wrist.
If they're
Like,
standing,
yeah, you can't do that. You know, that's not the correct response to have for just somebody being like, "Hey, buddy," you know, the first thing you do can't be box their ears. But karate does that, I guess, to give you these scenarios to practice these things, to hone your skills or whatever. But that's not intended to be what you memorize for a simple lapel grab. If it's only a lapel grab from a teenager on the street, you can't box their ears and collapse their windpipe and do all these things. So I think you have to catalog things, and that's part of that control we were talking about. Like, when do you grab your taser? When do you grab your handgun? When do you grab your baton? You know, when you're a police officer, which tool set are you going to draw from? That's also a decision you have to make as part of controlling that situation. You know, are you going straight to an eye gouge, or are you going to try a wrist lock first and escalate? And, you know, what is this scenario? So it's that situational thing is immediate. What tool set am I about to use? And then how do I use it? Right.
right, and all these are snap judgments on the street. Whereas, Coral, because she's vertically challenged, might be able to get away with more aggressive self-defense techniques than I would with Thomas.
Right.
Plus, you could just have a little innocent smile and bat her eyelashes a few times and say, "And I feared for my life."
Yeah, after I box punch him like
Don't mean to pick on you. I'm sorry,
no.
but yes, it's a situational thing, and you do have to make snap judgments. One of my students, who's a green belt, did in a tournament for some other organization. I mentioned this before, and it was, he went past his uke's neck, and ultimately stopped the entire tournament. And it turned out it was an illegal technique for that level to use, because it was a secret technique reserved to black belts. And my only response after the judges from 3 different mats came over to me was, I guess it's not a secret anymore, because there's what else can you say? But anyway, there are situations, a lot of it comes down to you using the best judgment you have given the situation. And that's why, as Dane said, you're taught all these techniques, and you have to make, what in a street situation, you probably will not know what technique you actually used until you really sit down afterwards and give it some thought, because it just happens so fast. You don't know what you did. And but it is, you do have to use, I hate to say, appropriate responses. You cannot be overly aggressive. I mean, if you throw a person with a hip throw and they happen to crack a couple ribs and get a concussion, which is a normal response on the part of the attacker, you can't jump up and down on them several times to make sure they don't get up. That gets known as excessive force, and that can get you in trouble legally. So it's in the heat of the fight, you're expected, because you're a martial artist. This also comes into play because you're a trained martial artist. You're expected to be able to use better judgment than this person that attacked you.
And have better control.
Pardon?
And have better control because of the
Right.
mythology that the public has about what martial artists can do.
Right. And that case where I had to deal with the kid that was on drugs, I ended up having to explain in the courtroom what reasonable force was, what a proper hold was, how I applied it, what happened. I had to explain all of that. And I think the judge was amazed that I could explain it, being a public school teacher. He didn't know my other background with law enforcement, but but as a martial artist, you have to be able, if you end up in a situation, you have to be able to explain yourself in a court of law if it comes to that. Because there were charges that were brought against this kid, and he did spend 6 months with the California Youth Authority. And I felt sorry for the kid because his attorney really screwed up. But anyway, that's the way it goes sometimes, but it was a bad all the way around. Anyway,
George, can I add something? Something that you said and Dane said, talking about the techniques that are part of the art. There's this self-defense group that we teach, and okay, we learn that. And then there's these other techniques that go further out and are more aggressive and might be a simulated bayonet or whatever. There were a couple techniques that over time I dropped because I had a hard time justifying it, knowing that if one of my students actually was attacked and went into Mushin, and Dane, I'm sorry, you used the exact example that I had a problem with. Somebody grabbed my lapels and I broke their neck. And we got a technique for that. I can't justify that. And I stopped teaching it because I was afraid that my own students were going to actually incorporate that into their Mushin and do that unconsciously without realizing that was excessive force, because they're not thinking about it. They're just doing the technique.
yeah.
We forget in America that a lot of what we have here comes from the military. Like a lot of early judo in America was army soldiers bringing military judo that's intended for sentry removal techniques that then they're teaching mixed in with just like Olympic judo. And then the same thing with karate. They're learning it on air bases in Okinawa during the Vietnam War. And they're learning karate to be effective in the jungles of Vietnam. And then they're coming back home and teaching karate from that perspective. So everything is here, break the neck and choke them and do all of that stuff. And then over time, we have this 40 years later Karate Kid, everybody has a better understanding of things kind of world. But that stuff's still there. It's all mixed in. It's part of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there are. I'll teach a key turn or neck throw. I'll teach it in a particular way that's reasonably safe. I know that there are slight modifications that can be done to it where it will break a person's neck. And there are some techniques where I will only teach those modifications to maybe a brown belt adult or a black belt adult. I won't teach it that modification to kids or someone, or lower ranks, because as you said, it's not safe. There's too much of a chance they might do it accidentally and then be held responsible, even though the other person was the aggressor.
Yeah.
Liability laws are unique in the United States. Uh, and every state has their own parameters.
It's if I may, Sensei, it's funny to me because I have the opposite problem. Most of my students come to me for sport jujitsu. So translating that over to self-defense techniques, I do self-defense techniques every Friday, but I can't seem to get them to come. So I've only got a handful of students that will learn the self-defense techniques. And I think what we're talking about is escalation of force. And a lot of the sport techniques, I'm not terribly worried about them breaking somebody's neck or whatnot, they can take them down, hold them down, and get a submission hold or a choke hold on somebody. And I'm not terribly worried about excessive force with that. But they lack the. So, for example, if I'm learning a foreign language and my vocabulary is very limited, I've only got 12 words to use. My sentence is going to be archaic, but as I become fluent in that language, my sentences will be more nuanced and I'll have more of a vocabulary to address the conversation. I think martial arts is the same way. As I get more versed in the art of jujitsu, I'll have a wider variety of responses to choose from. And as I mature as a martial artist, I'll be able to use that type of discretion that's necessary for the situation.
Now I know with sport jujitsu is different from what I would call street jujitsu, or street self-defense. And what I don't know whether it was good or not, but I know when I taught in the junior high, probably at least once a year we'd have a paramedic visit because a kid got hurt. But that was an extremely valuable lesson for everyone else, that these techniques work and they can cause injury. And I mean, you don't want that to happen. But the lesson they learned from that, what happened, that they had much more respect for each other in terms of setting holds, tapping out, things of this sort, because they, it's one thing for a teacher to say, well, if you do this right, you're going to break the wrist, hunky dory. But if they see a wrist broken in class, that's a different impression. It's like, you can say, if I'm in a crosswalk, I'm safe. But once you see a kid hit by a car in a crosswalk, everyone around there realizes, no, we're not safe. And we need to be proactive. We need to look both ways. Back to the 2-year-old, look where you're going. And it's a learning, some learning experiences you cannot give students. So several weeks ago, we had when we were at our older dojo location before class, we had a girl about, say 14 to 16, run into the dojo before class saying, some guy tried to rape me. we're the only building in the park. The door was open, the lights were on, so that's where she ran, which was the smartest thing for her to do. Okay, because you've got all these, brown and black belts in there, and others, all adults. Okay, he ran to the door, saw us, and took off. We got her calmed down. One of the other students got their phone. They called 911. And eventually we just handed the phone to her because she was calm enough to explain what was going on and gave a good description of the guy. 10 minutes later, the sheriff show up. They say, we have it. Because she gave them a good enough description. There are things that happen that you don't plan to happen, but everyone in that room learned from the experience. This is what should be happening. We really didn't get into, are you okay? Do you want to talk about this? All this. It's all important, but what's important is to get the immediate care for the person. And that was a learning experience for everyone. And the only disappointment was the article appeared in the local, and we have good police coverage up here. There's an article in the local paper a day later about it. We were not mentioned at all. Some of the students were disappointed. We weren't mentioned. I said, that's not important. You did right. That's what counts. So, you're. I think if students are put in situation, if they go through experiences, they learn a lot from the experience more than, and this from your own experience. Something happens to you, you say, okay, that was really stupid for me to do. I will never do that again. Okay. If someone tells you it's a stupid thing to do, you go, maybe. Life goes on one way or the other. And I've had that happen to me numerous times, so I'm not exempt. Okay, let's go on to the next one here.
Sure, should we have time to go on? We're getting late, and do you want to
Okay, or do we want to just leave this as the only topic, or because the other one is how do you deal with students who challenge your thinking, or in terms of what you're teaching is effective, or they have different ways of doing things, or things of that sort, or they want to teach what they learned someplace else, or they proselytize another dojo in your dojo. Kristen's smiling. Okay, and let's leave this for next time, because there are a lot of topics here that how do you deal with a student who's basically messing up your instructional approach. Okay, so let's leave it at that. And Coral, thank you for being here. Briston, thank you for joining us. Hopefully you'll be with us the next Zoom meeting will be the first Saturday in June. Because I'll be on someplace on the Mississippi River.
Hey, good.
What is it? Today is the 4th. That would be the 18th. Yeah, it'd be someplace on the Mississippi River. Anyhow, but I will not be in the Mississippi River. I hope not. Okay. So I want to wish all of you a great weekend, and if you want those 10 quote unquote rules, and from Scott Anderson, that's who the sensei is, and he's down in Florida. Uh, if you want those 10 rules, just send me an email. I'll send you a copy of the it's called the BJ. It's the student handbook, but it's just exclusively for Udachikai members. And I think Christian, I think I sent you one yesterday.
Yes, Sensei, and I apologize for my tardiness.
Well, that's okay. I mean, it happens. Today I didn't realize I completely forgot about the meeting until 2 minutes before 8. I said, "Oh my God." So anyhow, hope your weekend goes well. And Lau, good to have you with us. And I think that's about it in terms of, so unless anyone has some closing words, we're just gonna bid adieu to each other, and hope to have you all back on, what's the first Saturday in June?
June 1st.
June what?
June 1st.
June 1st.
That's my wife's birthday. I won't be able to make it. I apologize.
I understand there are priorities. But
Head Sensei.
okay, take care. Thank you, Corinne, for joining us. May you be successful, and you have a salary that starts at 150 a year, thousand. Okay.
Thank you, Sensei.
Bye bye.
all.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Take care.
Where'd oh, there it is. They changed the screen.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Okay.
Senators.
Have a good weekend.